I apologize. I'm not quite the experienced, is this on?
Yes, should be.
Speaker. I'm grateful to MPAC and SSID for providing this opportunity to talk about the three Abrahamic faiths and how all of us can contribute towards peace in Israel and Palestine. I actually am a little bit out of my element. I mean, it was rather unique, my being on the Tucker show. And so I just want to say I'm thankful to be here with a scholar such as Mustafa Askil, who has fearlessly and perhaps provocatively at times promoted a vision of Islam that leaves room to embrace all faiths, and a courageous speaker like Peter Beinart, who has trod the fine line of being a defender of his Jewish faith and people, while also not being afraid to examine critically its deficiencies at this explosive time in its history. So I'm not a scholar. I'm just an Orthodox Christian nun, and I'm someone who generally would be taking part in not in worldly secular activities. As a nun, my day would be in prayer, 5 to 6 hours a day, having some simple obediences, and the remainder of the time in solitary reading and reflection in your monastic cell. But I'm taking some solace and encouragement from the words of Agapia the Solitary, a monk who lived in the 4th century in Egypt, who said, "If you're a theologian, you will pray truly, and if you pray truly, you are a theologian." So perhaps through prayer, I can find some words that can help us discuss this way of bringing a path to peace in the Middle East. I went to the Holy Land in 1996, and I transferred from my small community upstate New York to the convent of St. Mary Magdalene, right on the Mount of Olives, near the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus Christ betrayed before his betrayal by Judas and subsequent arrest by the Roman authorities. From my cell, I could look out the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, constructed by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent in the 1500s. Directly below me were the whitewashed tombs of faithful Jews, who consider this spot to be the most significant place to be buried, as it stands before the remaining remnants of the last Jewish temple, the Wailing Wall. And next to the wall, you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque, third holiest site in the Islamic faith, and the gleaming Dome of the Rock, constructed above the site where all the Abrahamic faiths say that their shared father Abraham, at God's command, was willing to sacrifice his son. Definitely one of the most intense places of the world. Yet behind the gates of the convent, nestled in a monastic cell, I never knew such peace. My life revolved around prayer and obediences. And I rarely went outside the gates. I didn't know what was New City, Old City, Israel, Palestine. Yet, during my 10 years in Jerusalem, I came to know the states and the roads of the state of Israel and all the parts of the occupied territories like the back of my hand. So I come from that experience today to speak a little bit about what I came to know. It's interesting what Peter had to say about, it seems to be we have a connection now that the Jewish tradition, the Jewish faith, has become too closely united to the idea of the state of Israel. So that left a blank, and you actually answered the question for me, because I was pondering on. So I'll go back. I was at the convent in Jerusalem, and then I was asked after 2 years to run our girls' school of Bethany, which was in the town of Al Azariah, next to Jerusalem. And we had so in our school we had 350 girls. Most of them were Muslim, 98%, because we were in East Jerusalem. And we also had some boarding students that came from Christian background, who came from Israel, from the state of Israel. Um, so I wrote at the school, but and what I came from there is and I just met Catherine Habib today and was talking about throughout the Levant. I had the chance to travel in Syria and Lebanon, and I saw something that I wasn't aware of as someone who grew up in America, how Muslims and Christians could live and work together. And I think that's the most important thing that was surprising to me, but also gives me hope for the future. Because I went to the school in 1998, and at that time, there were at least Jewish Israelis who were contemplating a peaceful resolution to the conflict with their neighbors. And you had that kind of an outreach. And then within what I saw in Bethany was that people could live together in coexistence. As a Greek living in US, I had rare contact with Muslims. So in fact, sorry for Mustafa, my only connection to Islam would have been thinking about Greeks being under the Turkish occupation from the 15th century to the 19th century, or the reality that we could no longer use the great church of Hagia Sophia for our services. But what I found in living in the Middle East was that we could live together. In our school, we had crosses and icons, and that wasn't a problem for anyone there. And all the institutions, many Christian institutions were there, schools, hospitals, nursing homes, that could be found throughout all the Middle East and served Muslims as well as Christians. In fact, I was even kind of surprised. I remember going into the Church of Nativity and the Holy Sepulchre and seeing Muslims there and saying, well, what are they doing here? But then I came to understand you see Jesus as a prophet and you recognize and respect him. Um, and then just through my own personal experience, the connection between Muslims and Christians in our community. People would tell me about going to the Church of St. George in Lydda, Muslims, to honor the feast the same as the Christians. Or a really wonderful story that sort of ties in with the occupation. We lived in Al Azadiya and we were under curfew. And always before the feast of St. Lazarus, where the tomb was in Bethany, all the nuns would gather and walk to the tomb of Lazarus. But because there was curfew, the nuns weren't allowed to come from Jerusalem. So there were only a handful of us at the school who would be going there that day. And I remember the two priests that were there, the two nuns that were with me, we decided it was 10 o'clock at night. We had finished our service on a Friday night. Yes, we're going to go and visit the tomb of St. Lazarus. And I walked towards the tomb past Israeli soldiers who did let us get there. It was about a half a mile away. And who's waiting there for us but Aziz, the Muslim caretaker of the tomb of St. Lazarus. So I think what I'm trying to say is that I just felt that there's a natural connection in Islam and Christianity, a respect for the sites, and I just found that striking at first, and I think it gives us hope again for the future. So what's the foundation that allows for such a coexistence? Um, Sorry, I lost my train of thought here. Like I said, I'm not really used to doing this to go on, but um, so I didn't abandon the Holy Land after I was forced to leave there in 2006, when I began to make pilgrimages twice a year. And what did I see? From Jerusalem, I would travel down to Jericho, pass by the Inn of the Good Samaritan. And what lesson do we learn there? It was not the priest or the pious religious leader who helped the Jewish man lying beaten on the side of the road, but it was an outsider, the Samaritan who helped his neighbor. And I think this is what's so critical and what Peter was talking about, a lesson to teach us not to let our religious identity be a barrier to aiding our neighbor in a time of want. And as a proud pilgrim, we travel north from Jericho and up the Sea of Galilee, where Christ performed his miracles of healing and preached his message of salvation, a message that can only truly be understood by those who follow the precepts found in the Beatitudes. You go over north over the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and there's a large Catholic church marking the location where Christ preached a sermon on the Mount containing the words such as these: Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, because great is your reward in heaven. And finally, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. And when I reflect on these words, two thoughts come to mind. First is the great admiration and respect I have for many, many more than those who resort to violence and despair, who have endured suffering in Gaza and the West Bank over the last 2 years, be they Muslim or Christian. How many times have I reached out to friends there who have lost loved ones or suffered lesser losses by having property confiscated or jobs that are no longer able to go to, so they're in need. They've been harassed by settlers or tormented by the sounds of bombs overhead. Yet rarely is the response from them one of bitterness, anger, or revenge. Instead, from both Muslim and Christian, I hear how they bear humbly and endure, saying only, our life is in the hands of God. And this is the message that is imbued in that land there. They recognize themselves as being people of God. And what strikes even deeper in my heart is they don't dwell on their circumstances, but with a merciful heart, they ask, how are you? Or how is your sister doing? Or how is your concern? And I think this is born from a tradition that had its beginnings in Judaism. But because Judaism didn't build on what was there. Christianity took that foundation that Peter speaks of too, that's really basic to all of us in our heart. And it's encompassed as well in the beatitude, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. So at least, I'm speaking sort of in religious terms here as a pious little nun, but what I also come in as is as a witness. So I lived there and I saw how at least Muslims and Christians could live in peace. And that's something that we don't hear too often in the West. And I think Peter's explained why, quite frankly, our interaction, we really had very little to do with the Jewish community. It didn't mean that there weren't people of goodwill there, but you didn't see it. And I think the thing that we have to talk about is the great devolution that has happened over the last 25 years. I moved there in 1996, and like I said, 96 to 2000, you could say there was still a peace camp. There were still Israeli Jews that were looking towards living in peace with their brothers and sisters. But as I go back every year, and what you see now has been, I think, because of the policies of Netanyahu and those like him, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. Think back. When I moved there in 1996, it was 6 months removed from Yitzhak Rabin having been assassinated by Jewish zealots, people who have taken their faith in the wrong direction. And at that time, in 96, 97, 98, those people were on the fringes of Israeli society. But what's happened over the last 25 years is that they've become the voice of the society, to the great detriment of what I hope is a silent majority that is still within Israel that does want to get back to basic principles that are rooted in all three Abrahamic faiths of care for your neighbor, of reaching out and being a peacemaker. So I just want to end with, how are we going to come to some resolution of this? And one big factor is the religious leaders. And finally, because it has become such a desperate situation, it's so 25 years ago, I could see that I called it genocide by Chinese water torture. So it was clear that something was not going right, the way things were moving in Israel and Palestine. But what was also true was that that the sorry, and that the church has to speak up more. And that I guess in my wildest imagination, I thought, after I left Jerusalem, because I had spoken out in Washington, I would then come back every year with pilgrim groups. But I used to think, how long are we going to be able to do this? And I guess it was sort of this imaginary idea that, yeah, sometime in the future, Holy Sepulchre and Church of Nativity will be like Hagia Sophia for a Christian. It'll only be a museum or even something less. But it was something that didn't really feel like, can this really happen? But today, I'm here to tell you that it can happen. And finally, the Latin Patriarch and the Jerusalem Patriarch, Greek Orthodox, are speaking out about that. It's almost like the last second, the last gasp. The Theophilus, the Greek Orthodox Patriarch, has spoken out and says, the church cannot turn its face away from human pain. Our Lord teaches us that whatever we do for the least among us, we do for him. So he's calling out that he's alarmed by what's happening to the Christian communities, and that we have to not only relieve their suffering, but like I like to say too, is not keep putting a Band-Aid on the problem. I can go to America and I say, my friends in the northern West Bank and the church is there, they don't have money, or that so we keep just sustaining the wound, the conflict, instead of looking for an end to it. And the same with the Latin Patriarch, Pier Babista Pizzabella. He's been very courageous in speaking out, but he says he recognizes that hearts have to change. So that's the responsibility of religious leaders, is to give a vision of how we can work together in the future for peace. But the real crux of the matter is, yes, we pray, but then we have to have a political solution. And I think everyone in this room and listening to this knows that ultimately the political solution lies with the United States. If America, to ending the occupation, and then you can begin to talk, will we have one state or two states? Until we end the occupation, nothing can be done. So this primarily lies with the United States. If we stop funding the means that allow the occupation to continue, if we stop providing the diplomatic cover, then we can begin to come to a solution. Part of the problem with this continued policy of the United States is that we rely too much on the lobby groups. And people point to APAC, but the other critical problem are the Christian evangelicals. And this is where I, as a Christian, have to speak out and have to witness as a Christian that the Christian Zionist community does not speak for all the Christians, and particularly does not speak for the Christians of the Holy Land. So if we're going to have only any change, it has to come from the traditional churches here in the United States, the Orthodox and the Catholic, beginning to come together and say, not just as Jews have been doing, not in our name are we going to allow this occupation to continue. Christians have to rise up and say, Christian Zionism is not the way to the peace, because all it does, it enforces that Judaic idea that you were talking about of exclusivity, of only counting or count not Judaic, but Israeli idea that replaced Judaism by focusing so much on the creation of the state or the creation of a law or abiding by a law instead of acting with a merciful heart and with compassion for our neighbors. So I know I haven't been very coherent, and I hope I can do better with the questions. But my basic point is that to make today is that I do believe that Christianity provides a foundation, having gotten its roots in the beginning from Judaism, and then Islam having carried over and accepted many of those same principles, that within our faiths, we can find a way that people can live together in any land where there's conflict. But we also have to do the practical things that will bring about peace. And most importantly, for the Christian community now, is to speak out and to work towards change instead of continuing, allowing the policies to continue.